You know, when I was a little girl, my mom used to come and wake us kids up with this phrase. She would say, "Rise and shine, rise and shine." It was actually a lyric from a Sunday school song that said, "Rise and shine and give God the glory, glory." You know, rise and shine. And what she really wanted us to do is get up, uh, put our clothes on all by ourselves, and then just have our best day. Rise and shine. And so that's my lesson title this morning, Rise and Shine, because I think it's a good Easter lesson title, Rise and Shine. So when I personally rise and shine each morning, you may not know, but I actually watch the Today Show almost every day, and I have for many, many years. For me, that show, for whatever reason, strikes the right balance for me between sharing the news without much opinion and not doom forecasting, right? So I know everybody has to find their own way of finding that bit of information that feels right for them. And for me, that is the Today Show. So whether you watch it or not, you're likely aware that the anchor of the show, Savannah Guthrie, is living the nightmare experience of having her mother abducted from her home in Tucson many weeks ago, and the investigation that's still ongoing as they try to find so many answers and ultimately find Nancy Guthrie or her remains. So every morning, the hosts of the show, since February 1st, the hosts of the show have been explaining that Savannah's not here because she is taking time. You know, we all get it, because none of us would want to be in the public eye being watched through something like this experience, and her absence is completely understandable. In a recent interview, she shared that she's going to return to the show, and the day selected is tomorrow morning, April 6th. She's also said that she doesn't know how to come back to her role, but she doesn't also know how to not come back to her normal life, but she's going to try. So what we all know, what everyone knows, is that Savannah is never going to be quite the same person that she was. And this type of experience changes a person to their very core. And sometimes life brings challenges or situations that change everything, doesn't it? Something so big, something so transformative that life as we knew it simply no longer exists anymore. And when we face that, we often withdraw, and there comes a choice as to whether or not we will rise and shine. So I think there may be an Easter lesson for us in Savannah's journey, and I think that because nearly the entire nation and most of the world is aware of this situation. So anytime we are a witness to something, there is a lesson for us in it. We just have to look for it. So let's see what that might be as we look at the big messages that Easter brings to us every year. For you see, Easter itself is a day set aside to remember the truth that endings and subsequent rising are a natural part of the life experience cycle. So let's unpack that Easter story a little bit and talk about Master Teacher Jesus before we come back to Savannah, okay? So this is the day when we are invited to remember the story of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And if you're new to this philosophy, as I said earlier in the service, you may be wondering how we New Thought people handle Easter. So you know, we've emphasized it several times in the service already, that we are a center that welcomes all people on whatever path of faith you may be following, and that includes Christianity. And we honor Christianity as a spiritual path that hundreds of millions of people are walking. But as you know, I may share this Christian story this week, but if you stick around long enough, I may bring out wisdom from the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran or an example of quantum physics or modern psychology. I'm going to pull truth and wisdom from whatever source I can find it in, because truth is truth is truth, and all religions of the world tell stories that lead us to a deeper understanding of truth. And our job as spiritual learners is to find those stories that resonate with us and help them, let them inspire us. And that's what we're all about, exploring universal truth with a capital T and figuring out how does this apply to our daily lives. So today, while much of the world is celebrating Easter, let's see if we can find a lesson for our current day from that very old story. But first, let's kind of remember the overall mystical story of Jesus and see if we can look at it from a different angle this Easter Sunday. So if you are on a spiritual path, seeking to live from a higher perspective, we say that you are seeking Christ consciousness. And this means that you're trying to seek a level of awareness, a level of consciousness of the power of the divine that Jesus demonstrated in his life and messaged about. He taught it. The way we look at the whole Bible story of Jesus is from a metaphysical perspective. That means we look at it more symbolically than literally. So have you ever heard that when you're trying to interpret a dream, that all aspects of the dream are really about you in some way? Well, that's how I want to look at the story of Jesus this morning. Now, I don't want to dive into the Christmas story too much today. As Randy said, he shows up at the very last minute anyway, so I don't really want to focus on that too much, but we have to start with Mary, okay? So if we're going to birth Christ consciousness, that level of awareness in us, then we have to be as willing as Mary was to get to know the universal power of God, or whatever you want to call that power. We have to say yes to unifying our physical existence with a spiritual one. And through that process of uniting a willing human self with a higher divine essence comes the birth of higher consciousness. The Christ consciousness comes into possibility. Let me stop there and explore this a little bit. Something within us yearns for a greater yet to be. We talked about that in Sacred Cup this morning. We have a yearning for something better, a higher possibility for our lives. And just like Mary, we hunger for something new and better. It is our human nature. It's our goal on our spiritual path to raise our consciousness to that level of Christ consciousness. And if we're going to do that, we must be willing to know God intimately. We must spend a great deal of time in the presence of the energy of spirit, the teachings of spiritual truth, and we must surrender to a willingness to be and express life as something more than just a human being attached to our mortality and our preferences and our ego survival. We must allow ourselves to get pregnant with new possibilities and ideas if we are going to birth Christ consciousness. If we're going to do that, we must become expectant with the understanding that love, with a capital L, and all the qualities of God are within our very being, growing and becoming more and more real. You might be wondering, how long does that take? I can tell you for certain that the gestation of Christ consciousness varies widely. But for most people that I've been around, it's quite a lengthy process before we can birth ourselves out into the world in a new way of being based in love and oneness. The birth of that best self takes some time. And sometimes, quite frankly, that time can get uncomfortable. But if you stick with it, things begin to shift and change, and it's worth all the learning and healing and releasing old ideas for it to happen. But just like Jesus was a baby, just figuring out the gifts that he was freely given, all the gold, frankincense, myrrh, shepherds, wise men, all those gifts surrounded that baby Christ consciousness, we too have to start figuring out our spiritual birthright. Christ consciousness opens us to an inner knowing and a spiritual wisdom and intuition. And as soon as you wake up to the awareness that these good things are your birthright, your good is yours. It all becomes available to you when it is yours. Where? in consciousness. Okay? So when you have that alive in you and it has been birthed into your visible life, into the wider world, then your light becomes brighter. People are drawn toward that consciousness. The light draws them in. As you become more positive, more hopeful, more expressive of good possibilities, you become more attractive because you are literally and energetically magnetic. The good draws near to you. That's how this whole thing works. And like Jesus, we grow up. What did Jesus do? The stories illustrate a person who shared the life lessons that he had discerned. He was born into a time when religion and government were working together to control the people. So the messages Jesus taught were radical. The church was saying, come to the temple and buy our sacrificial lambs and things to please God and gain favor. And Jesus taught that the love of God required no sacrifice. It wasn't dependent upon a sacrifice. You can imagine the church did not like its people being told that you don't have to come buy stuff, right? That's what he turned the tables over about. He taught that Jews and Gentiles, prostitutes and kings, the healthy and the sick were all worthy of love and fair treatment. And as you can imagine, neither the government nor the established religious figures were very pleased with these radical ideas. They also despised the fact that crowds of people were starting to follow Jesus and listen to his ideas of rebellion and radical love. We teach here what Jesus taught. So your consciousness is beginning to see that no one is special. How many times do I say that? Y'all are not special. You're not special. No one is special. We are all one. The government and religion can't tell you who to love and hate. We must share our good with each other, and there will be enough loaves and fishes. We must forgive and see the good in one another. We must understand that God is working for us. And if we stick with it, all these things become true, and maybe water will become wine. So as we wake up to our spiritual identity, our love, inner light becomes brighter. We find a more positive outlook on life. And as I said, people are drawn to that. Our spirituality matures and becomes awakened to the mismatch between our spiritual perspective that all is good and wholeness is possible and that of the establishments around us on the human plane. Fearfulness and separateness are no longer tolerable to our sensibilities as our spirituality matures. And just like the consciousness in the master teacher, Jesus, our Christ consciousness can sometimes ruffle the feathers as we question everything around us. Heck, we often ruffle our own feathers because we are questioning all the things we've ever thought were true, things we were taught in our lives. And as we rise to a more holistic view of the world, we might feel a bit rebellious to the establishment, both within ourselves and out here. And I know many of you feel that right now. I saw y'all last Saturday. You feeling that? Your inner truth is so strong, you know that any decisions being made that are not life-affirming, are not based in love, and are therefore not good for the human race. We do feel a bit rebellious right now. And as you know in the story, Jesus was eventually killed by the establishment for his radical ways, for his message of love and unity. But let's remember that he was first betrayed and doubted by those closest to him. Everyone knew the government was coming to get him. Everyone, he'd been sentenced to death. And so they were hiding as disciples when they held what would be the Last Supper. They found him because he had been betrayed. And there are so many symbols in the story of the crucifixion, and I'll save them for another Easter lesson because I've got more to do. But I want to talk about the tomb and resurrection today. As they removed the body from the cross, they placed it in a tomb. It was on the Sabbath. They couldn't clean it up right then, so they said they would hide it there. They would come back and take care of it when it wasn't the Sabbath. And as you know, when they came back, the stone had been removed and the body was gone. Now, what I believe that what I believe that happened on the human literal level is the body was stolen so that they could not create a shrine, they could not create a grave that other people could come and worship this radical human being. There wouldn't be a grave to visit where millions would gather to grieve. So how I interpret the Bible stories about the resurrection is that his followers didn't care that they didn't have a body. They didn't care. They saw and felt Jesus around them. His words still meant all they meant. The stories about their coping with the reality of his death but not letting his teaching die. They went on to teach more people about Christ consciousness, and it continues around the world today. They simply didn't let the tomb take their teacher from them, and the Bible stories let the world know that Jesus didn't die because his message didn't die. But what does that mean metaphysically to us? As your consciousness shifts and changes, it becomes different from those closest to you. Sometimes there comes a time when the world around you can't stand it either. The positive outlook becomes unbearable. The spiritual perspectives on topics most people view in fear drives some people nuts. They try to kill this in you, hopefully not literally. They try to talk you out of your perspective of wholeness and love, but you're not thinking about this, Laine. You're not thinking about that. Well, what about these people? What about this happening? No, they judge it, they question it, they poison it, they betray it. They may love it for a little while, but the world just can't take it, so they try to remove it. It can really feel like a symbolic crucifixion, meaning the death of an old paradigm. And when all this dying and ending happens, a tomb sometimes just feels right. You know, we've all had tomb moments in our lives, and the tomb moments are when we sort ourselves out within ourselves, right? When we wait for that expression of something new, but we don't want to do it on a public stage. When we're in a tomb moment, we have removed all the voices around us, all the typical expectations and obligations. We're not being influenced by anyone's opinion. We're focused on our own transformation, preparing for our own resurrection out of the prior situation, an old way of living, an outdated perspective. We take to our own counsel because we know that God is within, and our own intuition is going to guide us to the next level of our existence when we emerge. We take whatever spiritual teachers have shared with us and we examine it and we digest those lessons. That's tomb work. We decide for ourselves how we will live once we leave the tomb. Man, the tomb time is very important, and we wisely use it purposefully. Lean into it. Understand this too shall pass. I encourage you to appreciate any tomb time for what it is, a gift to your soul. Let's go back to Savannah for a second. The world has watched her withdraw from life as she knew it. She's no longer on a public stage, privately processing her life-changing experience out of view. In the few interview minutes that she was given, she shared how much praying she has done, how much she leans on her lifelong foundation of faith. She has shared how she knows she's no longer the person that she was, but that she doesn't yet know who she is now either. I can only imagine that she has cried a river of tears. I'm sure she's leaned on every coping skill that she has in her toolbox during this tomb experience. I know she's had to shed her understanding of how life works and grappled with her decision of how to approach humanity as a whole in the future, how to go through this experience and not let it define her, how to let it inform her as a parent and a public figure, a sister, a wife, all the roles she plays, but not crush her joy. And while her circumstances are uniquely hers, Jesus had his own unique path that took him to the tomb, as do each of us. The road of life seems to always lead to times when the perfect place to be is alone in a proverbial tomb. Why? Because in time alone we heal. We grieve and mourn our former way of being. We read books, we imagine and ponder the new way of being. Hopefully we spend a great deal of time in the silence and prayer and meditation. We allow the voices of our inner critic and our inner guide to have a long conversation, and I hope we journal about all of it, because we should capture the growth that is happening. In the tomb, we will decide how we will reemerge onto the stage of life once they roll the stone away. There's always the distinct possibility of an ascension of sorts for each of us. We are invited, each one of us, to rise and shine. It's the time to call forth your soul to rise into leadership in your life. Ask your highest self to drive the bus of your life when you emerge from the tomb. Come forth from the time apart with a renewed commitment to being loving, to being kind, to being a part of something bigger than yourself. So this beautiful Easter morning, we have a choice. We can get bogged down in the argument about what really happened 2,000 years ago, or we can just simply choose to know something happened and it has positively impacted all of us with the hope of renewal. Whether it's the story of Jesus in the tomb or witnessing a public figure emerging from a tomb of sorts tomorrow morning, or our own personal tomb experience in our own lives, transformation and rebirth is a natural part of the journey of life. And that is why we tell the Easter story. It's a universal story. Howard Thurman, the great theologian, wrote this: "The resurrection is not a one-time miracle, but a continued invitation to rise into a newness of life, to see that no ending is final and every moment holds the seed of beginning again." That is the Easter message. The point is to be the one who rises into spiritual enlightenment, into peace, into better version of yourself. Be born again into your identity as a soul, not bogged down by wounds from the cross of life, nor needing to judge others who hurt you, not identifying with your human struggles. Let's rise and shine. What does it mean to shine? It means to live connected to Source, expressing love and joy and harmony wherever we go. You shine when you give your gifts and strengths to the world around you. So tomorrow morning, I invite you to join me in holding Savannah in our prayerful hearts as we witness her emergence from her tomb and her rebirth of a new version of her public life. May she shine, and we all feel a bit inspired to do our own shining. Happy Easter.